My Meta Monday, what is standard all about? My Meta Monday, what's in historic? Let's find out. Good morning, chat. Welcome to Meta Monday. It's the first day of Costume Week as a thank you for everybody donating to the American Heart Association that we did earlier this month. I figured it only made sense to have a costume themed song intro for Meta Monday. Natterjack, thank you for the 40 months. It is kind of cozy in where it gets a little chilly in my basement here sometimes, you know? It's not bad. My daughter went to preschool in something similar this morning. It sounds like your daughter has excellent taste. Okay, so Meta Monday. Let's dive on in, shall we? Does a onesie count as a costume? I mean, everything's a onesie if you try hard enough. All right, so we had a couple of Red Bull tournaments over the weekend, both standard and historic. We're taking a look at a matchup matrix from the standard event on MTG Melee. This has a few different events for Melee over the weekend in here, all linked underneath the MTG data tweet. At this point, standards like mostly in a holding pattern. A lot of what we're seeing here are things that if you've watched the Meta Mondays the past couple of weeks, there's not a ton of surprises here. Grixis turns performing a little bit better than it has in the past. All the turns decks actually up a little bit with dragons being down a touch. Dimir Control, actually the deck that I highlighted on the Daily Deck Digest this morning, continuing to be in both incredibly popular and put up aggressively middling win rate numbers. I did have a couple of decks I wanted to pull out here that were kind of interesting for the week. So there's this Temur mid-range deck, which I was wondering if that was the green-red splash counter spells, but it's actually more than that. It's green-red, like this treasure theme with not only counter spells, but also Aldarune's Epiphany. So in case you are wondering, can there be another flavor of Aldarune's in the format? The answer is almost always yes, I think. Now, in happier non-Aldarune news for Standard, another deck that had decent metrics for the weekend with a smaller sample size was this Golgari midrange. This is something that we're definitely going to play on stream at some point this week. And now, this is Golgari here in quotes because it is a green-black deck splashing for counter spells because that's not optional in this Standard format. You got to kill people or you got to have counter spells. So I do like the look of this deck a lot. I think it's doing a lot of smart things in the format. We've got 8 2-mana accelerants to get to your Azeka's Chariot and your Binding of the Old Gods ahead of curve. We've got Ren and 7 and Spider Queen that pair very well with this. You've got some sweepers at the top end and then counter spells to give you a chance against the Epiphany deck. So I think this is a very reasonable thing to be doing. Transitioning from the Red Bull and other MTG Melee data into recent Untapped statistics here. So Untapped, if you're not familiar, is the Twitch overlay / deck tracker that you could use at home to track your stuff. So they usually have decently large sample sizes for stuff like this. And you can see at a glance, this is again just kind of more of the same green Stompy and Izzet Dragons towards the top. And one thing I didn't check to make sure is I believe Izzet Dragons does not include Izzet Turns. And for people that aren't familiar with the distinction between the two, the Izzet Turns decks compared to the Dragons decks, they tend to be playing fewer Dragons, but they also tend to be playing the cards that copy their extra turn spells. We can look down around here. You could see pretty much everything that's not mono green or dragons has largely fallen off. And looking at the matchup breakdown from here, it kind of makes sense why dragons being popular makes mono green popular, right? You can see here one of the big reasons to play mono green is it has this strong Izzet Dragons matchup here. So I think there's diagnosing and talking about metagames always has a lot of complicated things in it. And while what I'm saying is just an educated guess, while there are a lot of powerful cards in mono green, I think a lot of mono green's power in this standard format comes from the fact that it's just one of the best things to keep up with this Dragons deck. And I think not only just the Dragons deck, but also just the various Epiphany decks. And while Dragons here looks like only 17.5%, you know, looking at this where we have stuff from here, the total Epiphany decks is what? This is 21% Epiphany, 24, you know, more turns down here. So close to 30% of the field every single week has been some form of Epiphany deck. Let's move on to Historic. So this table, while fun to look at, I would give you an asterisk compared to the standard table that we looked at. So there was one decent-sized Historic event over the weekend. It was a Red Bull tournament, but it was the smaller of the two. This only represents 616 matches played, whereas the standard matrix we were looking at here represents almost 3,500. So there's a large factor difference here. That being said, it can still give us kind of loose feelings for the format, the primary of which are, unsurprisingly, Jund and Izzet Phoenix look to be the most popular things in the format by a bit. Something worth noting in the metrics here is that Jund Food and Jund Citadel are split out into two different metrics here. So these decks have some similar things going on, but also some differences with the key card being Bolas's Citadel. But if you lumped these Jund variations together, they were the most popular. Yeah, one thing that stands out to me looking at this, and honestly, we have metrics here on the ladder here too, is Shamans is starting to put some results up on the ladder and has a pretty respectable win rate while putting up results on the ladder. So it'll be interesting to see, is Shamans another one of those decks like Elves where it's like a ladder deck and puts up metrics there but never puts up anything inside of tournaments, or are players that are playing in tournaments just kind of lagging behind what the ladder is doing in comparison. I'm hesitant to talk too much about individual win rate metrics here, because when you get, you know, below human companies, you'll see that we really have small sample size. These are less than 100 matches total, so these numbers take kind of a huge grain of salt. But what we can see from this is that Historic seems to be pretty varied. Unsurprisingly to anybody with a brain in their head, banning memory lapse from the format appears to have created more diversity in the format. There are still some decks that are better than others, but that's always going to be the case. But it does look like creature decks especially, you know, we see Human Company and Simic Merfolk up here with popularity and seem to be at least somewhat competitive, given some room to breathe with making control worse. One thing to call out, again, just looking at interesting decks that kind of had some numbers here, Selesnya Enchantress had 9 copies registered, and unsurprising to me, the variation of Selesnya enchantments that looks to have been successful this weekend is a variation that's not doing any kind of weird prison stuff. I've seen a ton of variations of this archetype that are trying to do like 9 live Solemnity stuff, and that always seems clunky and bad. This build is basically just looking to be a mid-range deck that utilizes Sithis and Citizen and Calyx to generate card advantage, and I think that this seems like a very decent way to head with this. Someone mentioned mono white. So yeah, so one thing that I think is worth calling out, mono white Humans here has a pretty mediocre win rate, but also small sample size. But something to note here is that I would bet part of this deck's issues, as you can see, we were 0% in a small sample size against Jund Food. Well, obviously 0% is an overstatement. You know, Magic's a game that has a lot of variance and a larger sample size. I expect them to get on the scoreboard some amount. I do expect the White Humans deck to be poor against the Food deck. I also think a lot of the power of this mono White Humans deck was that because it being a Thalia deck made it really reasonable into Jeskai, and because Memory Lapses pulled Jeskai controls power down a little bit, mono White Humans getting worse as a result of that makes a lot of sense. All right, any metagamey stuff that I didn't cover that someone would like me to talk about? Is there a statistic or a number on any of these charts that I didn't talk about that you'd like to see me talk about? Throw your opinions in chat before we close out this segment. Silly Cheese, thank you for the 33 months. Gengar, welcome back for the 3rd entire year. Coolio, thanks for the 2/3 of a year. Klepto Zaniac, thank you for the brand new sub. Welcome to the channel. Can Joe, thank you for the 29 months. Not Famous, thanks for the 20 months. Natter Jack, thanks for that tier 2. Sorry I don't do those mid-segment. I just like to try and power through that in a good chunk so it can be mostly concise on YouTube. A little surprised that Merfolk has a better win rate against Jund food compared to humans. Again, this is a really small sample size, 50%, but only 4 and 4, less than 10 matches played. I wouldn't be surprised if Merfolk is similarly bad against Jund food in a larger sample size. Fixer Shiss, thanks for the 31 months. Fight Me IRL, thanks for the 22 months. Is the other category in a place that I would consider healthy? Yeah, I think so. So not only do you need to look at the win rate of the other category, but also look at the size of it too, right? Like the other category here only represents, less than 30% of the field. So there's a large percentage of the field that is spread out here that's shown broken out individually. Same thing in the standard, honestly. All right, so people asking about